We can start now, sir.
Fine. So, good afternoon. Let me first wish you all a very happy GST day today. I'm very delighted to welcome all the distinguished speakers and also the attendees for joining us in very eye-watering number today. Friends, I personally feel that today's speakers and also the interveners, they don't need introduction at all. They are the most consistently creative, interpretative, patient, and rich contributors to the evolution of GST law, which has turned 3 today. For the baby GST, July 1st appears to be a very auspicious day if you go by the revenue collections figures which have been released today itself, and it has bounced back to almost 91,000 crore. So on this note, let me invite Mr. Lakshmi Kumaran sir to share with us how he felt on 30th of June 2017 when the GST was unfolded, and how he looks at the implementation as well as the evolution of GST law after 3 years. So welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Shalinga. I was watching this program on 30th June 2017 when the President and the Prime Minister inaugurated at midnight with a bell. I was happy and also unhappy. Happy that at last India has got a major tax reform rolling in. The old days of tax on tax will go, and the tax paid in Maharashtra will be available as a credit while paying tax on Karnataka. I was happy. And I was sure that this will reduce the cost and boost the exports and increase employment and major contribution to the economy. It's a day of celebration. But I was slightly unhappy because we were not fully ready, both the industry and the government. And because of this non-preparedness, ill-preparedness has cost us a lot to the industry as also for the government. Industry was trying to grapple with the problem. They were thinking that will not come up for implementation on the 1st of July. It happened. And I know a number of companies were not having their IT infrastructure ready. And the new methods, understanding the GST law is not simple tax, as the Honorable Prime Minister has said it. It is complicated. It's getting more and more complicated. In any other country, if you have to introduce a reform of this nature, the laws are put in place after getting public debate, and there enough time is given, and 1 or 2 years are given time for people to adjust themselves. In the last 3 months or so, it's a full dress rehearsal takes place, and then implemented. But this hurried way of implementation has really costed a lot. And that is to the extent I was slightly unhappy. Of course, the legislation also brought its own drafting errors and complications, which could have been eliminated. A golden opportunity to make a really simple law we missed. I suppose there is compulsion, political compulsion, because the state government and the central government were very eager to ensure that whatever revenue was collected by them prior to the GST, at least that is collected later. It is whatever be the economist's method of calculation, they were skeptical, and therefore they tried to plug every other so-called possible loopholes with provisos and explanation, with which were very good. And that has actually complicated the matter. So we have a good policy decision with not so good drafting of legislations and the implementation. But one thing I must give to the credit, in the early stages of implementation of this GST law, the government and the GST Council are very proactive. They try to help the industry to their clarifications, etc., etc. And GST Council also met several times. They took many unanimous decisions. They're all good. The cooperative federalism actually worked when I was happy to see the entire the growth of this particular the cooperation. So that is what I would say as far as my thinking of the past. As far as the future is concerned, many of the problems still remain unresolved. We still have the inverted tax structure. And many cases, we have blocked the credits. Whenever you block the credit, it becomes a cost. The whole idea of having a seamless credit system and thereby the cost is not increased is lost. Especially it is going to tell very severely on the exporters. And we also created an organization called Anti-Profiteering Authority. Basically, it is to give a check to the people that they don't make money out of the tax structures or reductions in being given. And that authority has basically to provide anti-inflationary measures. But that became a major source of so-called revenue. And the types of orders that are being passed, originally it was only for 2 years, temporary period. Now I think at least for 20 years they will remain, if not more, because several investigations will take place, orders are being passed, etc., etc. So there are quite a few of similar advanced ruling is another major issue where we are seeing the type of orders that are being passed is also less than desirable. GST is trying to upgrade the systems, the e-invoicing, etc., is put on hold. So, as I think once Rohan mentioned, I think if I remember correct, we are trying to change the wheel when the car is running. Rohan, did you not tell me that a long time back? And we are still doing. I think we are still doing that. I cannot borrow that idea from you. I can only echo what you have said. And we are still doing the same. Only thing is the car is running faster now, and we are still changing the wheel. I think I'll stop here, Shailendra, and then let others.
Giving us wonderful insight into this very briefly. And let me go to Mr. Rohan Shah, sir, since you refer to him in terms of this, the speeding car and a lot of changes being done. So let me go to, sir, let me invite you, sir. Please share your thoughts about, the GST last 3 years. How do you look at the implementation and the excitement which you had? Those excitements still survive, or you look at, maybe the future part we can talk about later, sir.
Shailendra, many thanks for having me on this very, very good and distinguished panel. I look back, to the date of introduction. Without a doubt, there was a huge sense of elation because, GST was a dream which had been spoken of for a long time. And its need economically was severe because we had a tax system where one stream of indirect tax did not result in credits. Therefore, the system, was inefficient. You also had several species of transactions which were suffering tax both as a service and as a sale. And overall, those were all signs that we desperately needed a change. And I think to the great credit of everyone who worked so hard to bring about a GST and to bring about a GST in a nation like ours with the diversity we have is very, very creditable. And although the last 3 years have done no credit to the GST, on that day, I think we were a nation, full of elation and full of hope. Leave the slogans aside, one nation, one tax. I think in substance, we had something to be proud of. On that day, if I speak personally, I had three apprehensions. One was we had changed the constitutional scheme to support the one nation, one tax. So, we brought in Article 246A. We constitutionally sanctified the GST Council. These were important changes and, were changes which literally do come once in the lifetime of a nation. the question was that while we had brought the changes, what would be the impact of these changes? And one could only sort of wait and watch. The other issue that one had was in the infrastructure, that, by getting ourselves married to the date of the 1st of July 17, had we actually inbuilt the recipe for at least a short-term failure in terms of expectation versus reality. Because on that day, our level of preparedness was low, infrastructural preparedness was low, administrative preparedness was low, but most critically, industry preparedness was almost non-existent. And from that perspective, no law has ever succeeded on the quality of how it is written. It has always succeeded on the quality of how easy it is to follow and how easy it is to administer. So that infrastructural challenges were very, very large in my mind. Sadly, all of them have been proven true. Whether it is GSTN, whether it is lots of changes that we have seen in returns, in procedure, equally, the number of changes that we have seen in legislation. And, we've suffered 60 retrospective amendments. This law was supposed to bury the DNA of issues like retrospective amendment, but we've suffered those. And my last apprehension was really institutional. How do center and state officers work together when we have a crisis, and biggest crisis is shortage in tax collection, which we are facing now. How does the discipline be maintained in terms of tax administration if we go back to creating all tax shortfalls and treat them as evasion? What sort of a culture were we going to bring? We were supposed to leave behind litigation, and institutionally we therefore brought in the AAR. I can unequivocally say that the advance ruling has generated more litigation than it has resolved. From state to state, they differ. There is no mechanism to go and correct it. The NA, is constituted contrary to a Supreme Court judgment in Roger Matthews, which says you cannot only have technical members. But we are faced with the dilemma that it is passing orders by the day. It has now reached a stage that because it would have passed 500 orders, every court will hesitate to say that how can I now strike this down? So, while the fact that we have a GST is to be celebrated, I don't think this nation continuously deserves to go through difficulty because we cannot get our legislation right or infrastructure right or institutions right. And I think that has affected us, and it has affected us very deeply.
Summing it up very nicely, so that it has adversely impacted all of us in a big way. Let me go to the man who was in the driving seat that time, in CBEC, when the GST actually was being finalized, the law, the procedure, a lot of things, a lot of limitations, of course, and a lot of insights he has to share with us. So let me invite Mr. Najib Saab. Sir, please share your thoughts, sir.
Thank you very much, Shalinder, for having me in this very distinguished panel. July 1, 2017 was truly historic. We had midwifed this entire process for such a long time. The gestation period was more than 10 years long. And unfortunately, what has happened is every time when we talk of GST failing, we are talking in terms of our expectations of the law rather than comparing it with what was pre-July 2017. I think each one of us needs to pause back and see what we have left behind to then start measuring what GST did achieve. Because the disappointments flow primarily because we had a lot of expectations of GST, and quite frankly, all of us did have that expectations of GST. Much has been told by both Mr. Lakshmikaran and Mr. Rohan Shah about the fact of perhaps us rushing into a date. Please don't forget again, 2017 was a year when the government had just one more year before the elections had to come in. So had the decision not been taken in 2017, it could have been deferred indefinitely to post-2019 in 19 perhaps. And remember again, politically, it was a very bold decision. Almost every single government which had implemented this law lost the election thereafter. That is the historical fact. So it was a decision which needed to be taken, in my opinion. Otherwise, we never really would have been fully prepared to have a new fiscal law. The lack of preparedness of the industry was primarily, in my opinion, only because industry thought this is yet another date being thrown at them and definitely it'll get deferred. They somehow never took the government seriously, despite the fact that they were being assured that this time there's likely to be no postponement of the date of implementation. Yes, we assumed that technology would take care of multiple provisions of the law. And I suppose we could speak a lot about technology, but technology has let us down. There's no denying the fact that had technology worked and facilitated matching and 1, 2, 3, we would have had lesser problems. The procedural issues would have been tackled, but now we are having basic technological issues. We are having basic issues leading to evasion, again, because of failure of technology. So yes, GST could have been better. Who could say that? But please again remember, negotiating with 29 state officials, all coming in with different experiences, is not easy. It took us a lot of time and effort to arrive at consensus, and there's a lot of give and take. Hats off to each one of the states who gave in so much of their sovereignty, as it were, and of course to the center. And pooling of the fiscal sovereignty was a huge major step going forward. I must also mention about the constitutional amendment, which was an outstanding job. When we talk of GST, please don't ever forget the constitutional amendment and the challenges we had going through getting that on board and notifying it, and thereafter the 1-year timeline kicking in when we wanted to implement the GST law. So all in all, a GST law could have been better. GST was waiting to happen. It was an idea whose time had come long back, and we just kept delaying it because of multiple issues. But it is a wonderful achievement. And all I can say is that going forward, we'll only improve. We'll only become better than what we were. And now that with the experience of 3 years, we've all learned a lot of lessons. Technology, again, is being closely watched at and addressed. Hopefully, things will only become better going forward from here.
Right. Thank you, sir. I mean, very rightly, sir, you observe that, technology has let us down. Yes, absolutely, sir. Let's go to Pratik, sir. Pratik had a first-hand tryst with the technology, so maybe he will give us better insight into this. Yes.
Yeah. So a reform of this kind, 3 years is too short a time really to take a judgment on that. But I'll just say that look, from a that we always look in any kind of reform and reform simplicity and transparency. I think on the first and third, GST has really done much better than what I was expecting. Look, when I say simplicity, I'm talking about the simplicity of the concept, okay? That every transaction is liable to one tax, goods and services tax. Different states have one rate of tax. You don't have border sort of restrictions and so on and so forth, right? So to that extent, I think it is achieved the objective. It is reflected in your supply chain costs going down substantially. You have tax, sort of rates going down on most of the products. Most of the products, the tax rates have gone down, and in some cases substantially, right? So therefore, the benefit of that has been passed on to the customer. And of course, there is anti-profiteering and there are issues around anti-profiteering, but anti-profiteering is also ensured. That industry is kept on the tender hooks to ensure that the benefit has to be passed on. Now you can always debate whether it's a price control or not. On the transparency front, I think each state on the VAT front were taking its own decision. But somebody would increase the tax rate, somebody would reduce the tax rate. There's a lot of sort of advocacy happening from different industry bodies. All of that, to a large extent, has stopped, right? Because now at least you have a process. Now you can question the process, but your press release after every GST Council meeting, you have enough discussion, you have discussion notes, what has been discussed, and all of that. It's almost like a live telecast of all the decision-making process, right? So transparency is there. Where I think I'm slightly disappointed is the stability part of it, because the policy has changed substantially over the last 2-3 years, right? And every time you make, so government can always take a tactical decision, right, to increase the tax rate or reduce the tax rate, but you should not tinker with the tax policy, right? So for example, this year, the first thing which they did was for real estate sector, they restricted the input credit. Now that's not a tax policy that you should ever have. Now you had to take a decision that you believe that industry is not passing on the benefit, and there has to be, you already created an anti-profiteering sort of mechanism for that. So never a good idea to change the policy. Kerala cess is another example, right? It's a dilution of the policy that we all started with, that no new cesses and taxes will come in. Now, once you have diluted that, it becomes a precedence for others to come in. Your returns dates have been deferred again and again and again. I mean, you have not been able to implement this. Although GSTR 3B has stabilized, you have, if you compare April 19 to February 20, you have 10 lakh return while now every month, right? You at least something is working on the technology front. Many things are not working. So that's where I think the government needs to look at. And the other thing which I'm slightly now disappointed in GST Council is the decision making is taking a lot of time, right? So earlier, of course, as Lakshmikant sir mentioned, that they were very proactive. But if you see last 6-8 months, there are decisions which have not been taken. I mean, one example, if you see intermediary circular, which got withdrawn, the first circular was issued in September or October last year. And they said the new circular will come in. Now it's already been 9-10 months. Now, when will it come? And when will this uncertainty, entire ITS sector is facing this huge uncertainty, whether the services are intermediary or not. So that's only an example. So I guess everybody knows technological challenges. I would want to highlight one that I think is slightly unfair to blame everything on GSTN on that. I think the lawmakers have to take that responsibility as well. There is a lot of changes that kept happening as GST was getting implemented, and they always thought it's very simple to just change the table and the row. It's never that simple when you're talking about technology. So I think everybody has to take that sort of blame together. Hopefully, when the new return system comes in, e-invoicing comes in, we need a clear roadmap. We will talk about future. But in balance, I would say that from industry point of view, I would rather GST from July 1, 17 than not have it, or maybe deferring it to 2019. Yes, there have been challenges, but I'm sure that we will overcome many of them as we go along.
So let me throw open the floor to two of my interveners. We have Mr. Sridhar and Mr. Vijay Kumar. Maybe they would like to add something here.
Yeah, I think it was very nice listening to all the expert comments. Only one reaction from the stability point of view, because the past has been very good. It has brought in a real simple tax. To that extent, I think there is no difference of opinion. With regard to the stability, one point that really needs to be highlighted was this regime, the new regime, came with a lot of hope of advanced rulings, doing much of hope for people who had doubts. Perhaps that stability has been perhaps a bit shattered with what we stand as of today. And that is one aspect of stability. The second thing that I would say that what was really important is there have been certain policy changes with regard to the industry, which the government thought it was re-looking at certain things when all along the industry had thought of it in one way. The intermingling between goods and services, the impact of service considered in a sales promotion activity, which was hitherto always held as goods, that really brought about a huge problem between end of 2018 to middle of 2019 and end of 2019 until that circular was revoked. So all these policy changes, in my opinion, are creating more problem. But the crucial point right now is, I would rather say, is that whether we can provide stability going forward to what we stand, and we can make changes to those earmarked areas which has been letting us down in the last 3 years, I must say so. And as far as technology is concerned, I think Pratik is on the point. It's not right that only one person takes the blame. Even the industry has to take the blame, because I was a part of industry. We were also found wanting in certain stages, though we really made up for a lot of lost pace. But however, I would rather say policy changes should be the focus. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sridhar. So, Mr. Vijay Kumar,
Yeah,
Are
I'll
you
just take,
around? Yes, sir.
I think I'll agree with Mr. Pratik on the technology and what Sridhar said. Well, technology has failed, or if technology has failed, maybe the man behind the technology must have also failed a bit. And as far as I am concerned, on that first day of July, I was not really very optimistic as you were. I felt it's going to be chaotic. And I'm sorry to say, I was not very disappointed. But for me, the hero in this GST is the Indian taxpayer. He has been bearing the burden of all the changes, all the failures, all the difficult situations that he was pushed into. In spite of all that, getting 90,000 crores in June amid the COVID is a great salute to GST. Yes, that's all.
Thank you, sir. I mean, of course, the Prime Minister also salutes the taxpayers, So in every speech he does that.
We'll be happy if he does a little more than saluting.
Okay. Okay. So, thank you for wonderful observations coming from all the distinguished panelists and both the interveners also. In fact, I would like to touch upon, the way forward, where I would like to start with Pratik, because he has some other engagements and he will be rushing out. So we would like to hear him first.
Yeah, so look, as we look ahead, and some of these things have been talked about, Sridhar did speak about the policy. The first and foremost thing is that we need to start planning from a long-term perspective about simplifying the law, right? Look, GST concept is similar to what you have done in EU, etc., right? Because you have goods and services tax, comprehensive tax, etc. But you have made a departure in certain very specific and important areas. One area is, for example, input tax credit, where you have restricted the credit for construction expenses. Some of that has gone to High Court, and ultimately, a decision will be taken. There is absolutely no logic for us to say that a particular expense, which is a business expense, you will not get a credit of that. Now, those artificial distinctions about immovable property, etc., maybe some of those were more relevant in excise context, but certainly not now, because you're taxing my construction expense. And the other is, your employee-related expenses. Why should you restrict the credit for my cafeteria or whatever business expenses I'm doing in office? There's no logic. The other aspect is, from a cash flow perspective, there are certain tweaking in the law which needs to be done, because you pay tax in the reverse charge and then you claim a refund if you're an exporter, right? Why do you not have, like in EU, you just do a debit and credit? You don't pay at all, because you're paying it and ultimately it's creditable, right? So you don't pay at all. Why can't we have, and thinking will sort of innovatively, why can't you have a GST paid in one state allowed an offset against another state, at least at a CGST level, right? Why don't you allow a CGST offset against income tax, because going to the same authority? I mean, it doesn't make sense that one state I'm paying tax, or one authority I'm paying tax, and to the authority of the same government I'm claiming a refund, right? Why can't we change, make this refund into a script, and which is a tradable script, and things like that, right? So we have to look at from a long-term standpoint as to how we can simplify it, how we can make it user-friendly. So that's the first one. Second is, some of these things have to be looked at to reduce litigation as well. Like advanced ruling, centralization of advanced ruling is absolutely necessary. You haven't even created the appellate forum. So every every sort of order which you will get now, I'm not talking about advanced ruling, but other orders, from commissioner, etc., you'll have to go to High Court, because don't have any other option, right? So some of that has to be looked at. The third is the center and state coordination, and that I think is very, very important from an industry standpoint. That earlier services were administered by center. Now it is state as well as center. States will, of course, take some time before they understand the nuances of it. And if 30 states I'm registered in, suppose I'm a service company, and 30 states adopt different views about the same issue, you are going to get into a problem, right? And things like, COVID will warrant you to make it more virtual. E-audits have to come in, and therefore there has to be a lot of focus on that. Last couple of points. One is a clear IT roadmap. right? This is, I think, very, very important. Whether e-invoicing is going to happen from October 1 or not, that announcement should come now and not on September 25th, right? Whether the new return format will come in and when it will come in, it should be announced now rather than sort of waiting for it. The decision making has to be faster. The GST Council, this fourth year, to my mind, is going to be the most difficult year for GST Council, because you will get into revenue pressure. Your 5-year sort of term, to my mind, for compensation most likely will have to be increased, because states will not agree to be compensated for 5 years. Yes, they impose new taxes, they don't have money, and therefore perhaps that's a negotiation that you'll have to get to. And last but not the least, which is more immediate need, is a COVID-related relief for the industry by way of deferring taxes, providing more liquidity support. World over, different governments have done it. I think India should consider doing it. Yes, there's lack of fiscal space for a large-scale exemption, but whatever help they need to, they can provide. Right now, that relief has been largely procedural, and to MSMEs, etc., for paying without interest. But perhaps much more needs to be done on that front immediately over the next 2-3 months.
Thank you for wonderful suggestions. In fact, including this tradable scripts. Let me go to Lachu Kumaran sir. Maybe you could give your comment on some of the suggestions which Pratik has made. How feasible is this tradable script? We had it, when the license permit laws were dismantled in 1991, and I remember Mr. Montek was in the Ministry of Commerce and he introduced that. The tradable script thing. I mean, is it possible, sir, at the right time to go for this kind of tradable script, etc.?
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. Basically, when you give the script, instead of a cash refund, in the case of cash refund, the company who is getting the refund can do it with anything with that money. But if you are giving a script, then we use for specific purposes. But then the freedom is available. It can be bought and sold. Of course, there can be separate GST issue on the sale price of the script. That is separate. That is a separate problem which we can handle separately. Whether the script is goods or not, etc. Again, lawyers will get in law, and then the officers will feel that is a package payable, and then 18% or 28% or 12%, as the case may be. What should be the face value? The face value should be the value of the script or not, etc. And I can, next 5 minutes, I can talk about the taxing problem of the script itself. But idea is not bad idea. I think psychologically, the tax officer is much more comfortable to signing a script rather than signing a check. Psychologically, I suppose. And more important thing is, when the script is there, the advantage is that it could be given to the person who needs. And there is a lot more stability, a lot more flexibility as per utilization of this particular script. And it's not a bad idea. And Pratik always comes with some very bright ideas, etc. But then the question of utilizing this particular amount in payment of income tax and all those things, etc. I think as of now, the government is keeping the accounts of income tax separately, GST separate, central GST separate, etc. for good reason, because the ultimate share of the revenue to the state and the center, that may vary very differently depending upon the central GST and then the income tax. While both of them go to the same coffers, but the distribution of this money is in different ways. There is bigger problem from the government angle. So I would say that while the script idea is not bad, but then offsetting this again, another state or the income tax, at least we are too early, is very ahead of the time. So Pratik, maybe 10 years down the line, these things may be still workable, but at this immediate point, unless Najib has a different view, I don't know that it's implementable immediately.
Can I just add one point, sorry, on this issue? I agree with sir that it's an idea which needs to be thought about. I'm talking about offset between income tax and GST. There are countries like Australia, like Denmark, where it already happens. Okay, so I'm not suggesting that you should start credits, input credit, etc. What I'm saying is that on one authority, if there is a payable, so the authority is a receivable, that you can always offset rather than making the industry to pay in cash and then claim a refund. This idea has been implemented in other countries. I think time has come to study. In fact, there should be a larger debate, which is my favorite topic, as to whether you need a CBDT and CBIC as two different outfits, or whether you just need to merge it into one single authority, which again has been done in other places. Why would you need to have separate tax administration? I mean, some of those things needs to be debated, discussed, and then one should take a call.
Thank you very much, Pratik. The same countries you have mentioned about Denmark. And what other countries? Denmark and?
Denmark and Australia.
Australia. So they don't have like a federal system, which we have different states. And most important thing, we must realize they don't have a provision for unjust enrichment in grant and refund. In India, especially in indirect taxes, we have a provision which went to the Supreme Court. In Mafatlalal case, they blessed it and they kept it as part of the system. The amount of the documentation and proof and the burden of proof on the assessee to prove that he has not passed on the burden to the customers to get the refund. And that process is so tedious. And then to say that offset this again, this is a thing which I do not know that can work at this point of time, is a laudable idea. Maybe Najib can throw some light on this.
Before I go to Mr. Najib sir, let me invite Mr. Rohan sir to share his thought on this issue.
So, for me, it's a very telling commentary that the machinery that we have in the government and in industry for tax payment and tax collection is actually greater than the machinery we have to ensure ease of business and encourage investment. And this must speak to us as a nation that for us, payment of tax is not an incident of doing business. Payment of tax itself is not only a business, it's a national obsession. There's no other country where there's so many debates on tax, so much airtime on tax, so many Supreme Court hours spent on tax. So, to me, that is something which we have to really caution against. Our obsession with tax, we must, if we are truly going to be a developed nation, acknowledge that tax is important but incidental to doing business. And the main focus is we should do business. In the current environment, while there are many attractions to doing many clever things, if I was to offer a view, my view would be this. Firstly, we all need to recognize and appreciate the fact that we do have a GST. We also need to recognize and appreciate that much of the pain is now behind us. 3 years, which are, the initial pains of any adolescent, pre-adolescent growth are behind us. The question now is, how do we take this forward by being sensitive to what are our needs of today? Because if a tax is not supportive of our needs of today, then obviously it is not playing the role it should. From that perspective, firstly, I would focus on tidying up what we have and making the most innocuous changes or the smallest changes, but ensuring that they have the biggest impact. So if I look at this today, my number one issue is input tax credit. It is antithetic to the concept of indirect tax, which is a value-based taxation, that the tax which is paid does not result in a full credit. All systems, the fundamental pillar of VAT systems, GST systems worldwide, whether you take an economic perspective or a legal perspective, if you pay a rupee of tax, you must get a credit. Now, within this, what is the rationale of section 17(5)? Because, you know, we have some burnout. Then we take industries. So for example, we took the restaurant sector and we said, if we give you a lower rate, we burn out your full credit. You cannot have credit. Then took it to the real estate sector. Now, you know, take this and let us put tax into reality. If you see 3 sectors today, which can generate the largest amount of continued sustained employment, including for daily laborers, it is going to be real estate, it is going to be the restaurant sector. Okay. Now, those 2 industries are the ones who you completely burn out credit. Or you have a situation where if we talk of capital investment in manufacturing, we will create factories. We haven't reached a stage where we manufacture without factories. We are not a 3D nation. If we put up factories and you don't give people credit for the structures which they have created to create your jobs and to create your goods and to create your GDP, you are again sending a completely antithetic message. So I would very strongly say, one, let us harness what we have. What we have is good and we have gone through the pain. Focus on the credit structure. Make it a full, robust, seamless credit structure. Let us trust the assessees a little more. Of course, there will be evasion, you know, and we have the mechanism to curb it. This is not a time where, given our revenue needs, given revenue shortfall with state compensation, that we can afford to do what the Sweden and Switzerland of the world do, because economically we are not in that place. But it seems simple enough that if we can restart the consumption engine, then supplies happen, then taxes are collected. When taxes are collected, please give full credit. And the third situation is, tax administration is not an adversarial system. It is a facilitative system. Today, AAR is creating litigation, NAA is creating litigation. If all the institutions which were to eliminate litigation are actually creating litigation, then we need to take a cold hard look and say, is NAA serving its purpose? Is advanced ruling serving its purpose? Are we better off with maybe 5 panels nationally of really good administrators, retired judges who will give balanced judgments, because people do need guidance. So I am a votary of harnessing what we have, perfecting it, and the anomalies which are there, let's address those anomalies. Those are addressable now. They will make an impact tomorrow or day after. You know, for us to think of lots of very innovative things, you know, there is a time and place for them. I don't know if that time and place is today. I would do simple, doable things which change the economic landscape.
No. So, I mean, there's a lot of issues in the bowl for Mr. Najib Shah. Maybe let me invite him to say his thoughts on this.
No, I entirely agree with what Mr. Rohan Shah was saying about the need for perhaps stabilizing what we already have and looking at rectifying the errors which have sort of crept in. There is no gainsaying, denying the fact that the entire GST was conceived on a free flow of credit, and the blockage of credits is simply not something which we should be having at all. And this basically stems again from the administrators perhaps not trusting the assessee enough, and the fact that there have been a large number of cases, if at all, of misuse of credit, which has been really dogging us right through. So ITC needs to be seamless. That something is a given, and the need for trusting the assessees cannot be emphasized more. The AAR and the anti-profiteering. The AAR, we had, if you go through the minutes of the GST Council meetings, you'll realize that there's a lot of debate on having a single national AAR. We really could not convince the states. Unfortunately, it created a huge amount of issues at the time of the discussions itself, simply because My own former colleagues are looking at it from the point of view of there not being parity between my commissioner and the equivalent officer in the state. And the states were looking at it perhaps as a job creation opportunity. We really were not going anywhere at all. We have discussed ad nauseum about the need for having a single authority that will take care of advanced ruling and the importance of advanced ruling. We could not somehow get through. In fact, we somehow failed there, and that's a failure, I fully admit, because like Mr. Rohan Shah did mention, that would have been a single huge step in ensuring tax administrators' facility and convenience. Anti-profiteering, you must again look at it from the political perspective, because there was a lot of political pressure going on there that VAT on VAT, tax on tax not being there, credit being there will lead to possible reduction in prices. That was the thinking. And we were also conscious of the fact that perhaps we may not get the same amount of revenues which we were getting pre-GST. Hence, again, when we went to the multiplicity of rates and the rate structure itself, that was weighing heavily on the mind of the tax administrator, that going forward, we should at least ensure that the revenue we get from August 2018, 17 will be the same as what it was in July, pre-July 17. So that the national, the anti-profiting authority, that is a backdrop in which it was conceived, and Malaysia was touted as a great example. And nobody knew that Malaysia will do away with GST itself going forward. But at that point of time, another example constantly being thrown at us that Malaysia has done it. It's very successful there. Why don't you also have it? So that's how the National Anti-Profiting Authority came in. And yes, we knew that it was a huge challenge for the Anti-Profiting Authority to ensure that whatever tax benefits are being given are being passed on. And I think they had a challenge, and to be fair to them, they have done what best they can. Prateek's point about scripts is well taken, but I really don't know. I think it's an idea whose time has not yet come, in my opinion. Perhaps going forward, it can be used. Whether it can be used for income tax purposes, I don't think so. And as regards the boards coming together, Partha Shom Committee had recommended that very strongly. And there was, of course, protests from both the boards about the merger of the two tax administrations. Ideally, that should happen, but it'll take a long, long time to happen because of the structure of the services as they stand today. Thank you.
At this stage, sir, maybe I would like to ask you a question, sir, that is it possible that, or maybe there was any thinking in the past regarding having an all-India GST card or kind of things?
There was a lot of debate, Shailendra. There again, there are multiple issues from the HR side, which really we could not come to any firm conclusion. There was a lot of debate and discussion that there should be such a thing, especially from the officers of the EC as it was then, that there should be such a cadre. The states obviously were not happy with such a proposal at all. Let me assure you that. So I think we have to consciously and constantly keep in mind the federal nature of our country. The fact that the states and the center do not exactly adversarial, they don't exactly enjoy mutual trust of each other in very many ways, especially in matters fiscal. So there was some issue on that, and that never really took off.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, Mr. Siddhar, you'd like to add?
Yeah, from the point of view of the future, I think what Mr. Rohan said is very relevant, that we must do what is best right now to resurrect what is there, instead of looking at so many measures that look very futuristic. Now, that way, if you really look, Shailendra, we in our TIOL's publications and regular articles pointed out at the time of pandemic, with regard to Section 16, so many things were really emergent, required to be done for the industries. If certain things could have been done in the last council meeting held in early June. Now, but that opportunity has been lost. So the emerging situations out of the pandemic, the fiscal support to the industry. For example, one simple measure in Section 16 with regard to the payment date within 180 days. The industry is down water the last 3 months. How somebody can pay within 180 days? A very simple thing, but such a big magnitude it has got an impact on GST. That's the first thing. The second thing that I would like to really focus on is short-term measures would mean would mean after the pandemic settles down, those issues which are low-lying fruits would have to be really capitalized on, like what Rohan said. And that would start with ITC. It should go to reforms of AAR, the complete creation of National Appellate Authority, and a possible creation of all tribunals which are overly due. That is one. And they start functioning. That would be two. The third thing would be the long-term future of compensation cess, because that does not come from any of the panelists at this moment. What is going to be the future of compensation cess? How cess is going to really fan out after the 5-year period? Because the states are clamoring for the fact that they are not getting their compensation on time. The fiscal press carries articles time to time, and the solutions that are possible before the government. And with regard to the long-term solutions, with regard to the long-term solutions, like what I would say Pratik said in terms of scripts and other things, I think that should really mature at the GST 5. We are talking about GST 3.0 and GST 4, which is dividing whatever needs to be done in the law, keeping technology aside, because technology will perfect by 21, because by the time we'll be 5 years down the line. So we should be doing it short-term measures and medium-term measures, and take out all the issues on the law and try to support the trade and industry. And last but not the least, there is something that it has not been come up in this last, let's say last 15, 20 minutes. We are still yet to look at the taxpayer as a stakeholder. And this is definitely something that Mr. Najib Shah can respond at the end when he responds, that we are still not looking at the taxpayer as a stakeholder. Am I being looked at like a stakeholder? That really needs to be asked. And if I'm still merely looked like a taxpayer, then this is not the GST that will take us to that level of 1,05,000 crores and 10,000 crores, unless you have the taxpayer as your stakeholder. That's all.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. So let me go to Mr. Vijay Kumar. Maybe you would like to add points.
One point which Mr. Sridhar mentioned was saying about the need to create the tribunals. But with the legal lockout, is it possible to create the tribunal now? And what are we going to do about it? But I just saw a letter a couple of days ago. The Orissa Commissioner of State GST has written to his government that we cannot create 3-member tribunals because of the Madras High Court. Can we create one single-member tribunal in Cuttack, Bhubaneswar, and some other places? Do you think we can really have the tribunal now? And that is a real lockout. How are we going to solve that problem? For everything, you can't rush to the High Court.
Maybe we should have the views of Lakshmi Kumaran sir.
I think as a lawyer, if there are more litigations, I should be happy. But as a citizen, I'll be most unhappy. What are the things which you can do? Very small measures which can reduce the litigation. First of all, in any tax administration, where a tax authority is acting little unreasonably, there must be checks and balances in the measures where to correct them immediately, not after 5 years, after 10 years. It leads to lots of undesirable effects as far as the tax administration is concerned. The taxpayers would be looking for some easier ways to get out of the system, etc. And if you have a strong, independent, judicious body, you have solved most of the problems. The first creation of the tribunals on the lines of Madras High Court judgments, which is again echoing what the Supreme Court has said in a number of matters. Government should not be standing on a formality, and I think they should implement it, because separation of judiciary from the legislative and the executive is most important. It is the basic structure of the Constitution. So therefore, if we can create that and populate with the competent persons, there are quite a number of competent judges, retired and serving judges, we can put them. And once they start giving decisions of immediately, many times the problems are getting solved. And we should also have a look at the system whereby the officers who are passing the orders they should not have any revenue bias, they should have a law bias. What exactly the correct system of law, rather than saying that by this process, whether how much revenue is lost. This problem comes mainly because the officers who are giving the decision at the original side or even appellate side, at some point in time, they go back to the revenue department. And therefore, they would look up to their promotions and the various things, including the question regarding audit and all those things. It may be better to create a separate cadre of officers at the administrative level, saying that these officers are earmarked for, you can give an option, for example, saying that they'll be part and parcel of the judicial process, quasi-judicial process, right from the adjudication, appellate, under the tribunal, and they could be trained. And their decisions are taken independent decisions. Somebody is not happy, they can file an appeal, no problem at all. But if we can create a separate cadre of officers, both at the center and the state level, who are deputed to the judiciary or the judicial functions, and they are not sent back into the system, like what used to have ICS officers earlier. They can opt for become High Court judges.
Yeah, correct.
And once they become High Court judges, they don't go back. They continue. Here also, you can become appellate member, you can become a tribunal member, you can become a High Court judge, I can go to the Supreme Court. All these things are possible. And there are quite a few officers are very, very talented, knowledgeable, and upright, and most important, judicious. But the fear of audit, the fear of promotion, all those things, etc., comes in their way in passing those honest orders. That actually clogs the system. Today in India, if we have so many litigation and tax, as Rohan has put it, tax has become the mainstay rather than incidental. Very well said. I do not know how a firm like me can survive in an economy which is doing only a tax and IPR. If it can survive, it means there is something wrong with the system. That means there is something wrong where the people are put in so much of difficulty in tax disputes. It should not be. If any developed country, you should have tax at all as a small component. It can happen only when you have a system of officers trained, given the freedom. And I have seen myself, the same officer in the tax department as appellate authority, how the decisions were taken by him. The day he was elevated and posted as a technical member in the CSTAT, the type of orders he passed, some of the orders are so good. I have seen the comment from the Supreme Court when they read the judgment. Wow, the officers are writing this type of orders. I have seen the actual commendation from the judge of the Supreme Court of the quality of the judgments. How did it happen? Only because when you go to the judicial body like CSTAT, your actions are not being scrutinized under a lens by an auditor or somebody. It will only be seen by other person whether it is appealable or not. So if you can bring that culture right from this adjudication to the appellate body, to the tribunal, then all the systems are taken care of. And whenever Madras High Court judgment is concerned, we don't have to file an appeal and then wait until the appeal to the Supreme Court. Implement it. And as we write, Sridharan has put, the taxpayer is a stakeholder here. Take him into confidence. You take it from me today, the GST law is addressed to the common man, taxpayer. Can he understand a word of it? He cannot. Is the law written only for lawyers and judges? Is it not meant for a common man? And why we need to have a system where a common man cannot understand, he has necessarily go to a lawyer or a pratik. Why should he? So therefore, there is a systemic change, a small change, not a very big thing, a stage where we can bring in these types of good, talented officers, put them into quasi-judicial processes, don't go back to the department, judge their action. Their CCRs is written by the tribunal members, not by the administrators. You make it, and they will know how many orders have passed, how many have been upheld, how many have been rejected. That is the test for finding out whether this particular officer is likely to be promoted or not. You put that as a system. You see now, the litigation will come down drastically. The lawyer dealing with the tax litigation will do something else in life. And the courts will not have so much of cases on tax case, and Rohan Shah's vision will be fulfilled. Thank you.
Sorry.
Correct.
May I just add some few thoughts to
Yes.
what Lakshmi has put so well. See, as you look at the fundamentals of any system, which is a justice delivery system, we have a very important twin principle, right? One is the discharge of a judicial function, and the second is the discharge of a judicial duty. Now, I think all of our tax tribunal administration, I won't say tribunals, has got caught in the principle only of saying, I am exercising a judicial function. I'm not exercising a judicial duty, because the judicial duty requires him to render justice irrespective of the factor of whether this is favorable to an assessee or it is favorable to the revenue department. The moment you train even the adjudicating officer that his responsibility is to deliver justice, A, he does not have a revenue role, and B, he is not discharging a judicial function. Because if his focus is a judicial function, he will tick the boxes. Have I heard you? Have I given you a show cause notice? If you ask for cross, I gave you a cross. But if he is focused on the fact that he is discharging a judicial duty, then his focus is on the rendition of justice, right? This is one change which needs to happen, because just consider the amount of man hours and national resource we spend in the adjudicatory and first appeal system. It is millions of man hours, it is thousands of crores, and those are today seen as an empty formality to get to the tribunal as quickly as you can. That means 40% or more of the time, effort, and resource that you dedicate is actually acknowledged widely as being wasteful. It reaches a stage where good officers say, sir, you have a good case, please take it in tribunal, I have to decide against you. There can't be a more stifling commentary for a bright young officer than to say that. Now, when you talk of tribunals, what is the key to any judicial institution? Credibility. And as was said by Lakshmi, we all know, having spent 25, 30 years in tribunals, ITAT, CESTAT, you had absolutely sterling technical members.
Yes.
Who wrote the law better than judges, who intricately understood the tax, who intricately knew how to mold the law to that tax and its needs. Some of our most outstanding jurisprudence has come from technical members. If the man who can write that in the tribunal, why deny him the chance to write it in the first 15 years of his career when he's sitting there as an adjudicating officer? So the question is, are we as a nation capable of saying that my tax department can be wrong? And if that is said even by the commissioner, I am mature enough to accept it, rather than say that let me fight for 10 years before the Supreme Court tells me my commissioner is wrong. And it is this which is again become such a noose around the neck of industry. How much resource do you spend pursuing a situation which you know is palpably wrong? And if you see adjudication orders to whether they are upheld up to the Supreme Court level, your ratio is abysmal. 94% of adjudicating orders on both sides of taxes are set aside. So you are spending more in litigation than you are collecting from dispute. And the last issue is, in India, why is every interpretational issue the subject matter of litigation? If there is a new law, there is interpretation, you look at any country, people will give examples of Singapore, America, but I'm saying forget everyone else. Can we not have a system where we say that, yes, this interpretational issue has come up. We will take our chief commissioner, we will invite Mr. Lakshmi Kumaran, we will invite one Mr. Sridharan. They have nothing to do with this issue. We will seek the view of these three learned gentlemen or a learned lady. Please opine so that we have some clarity. And we will now refer this to the board let the board also study it and probably issue it as a clarification. Interpretational divergence in this country, divergence means dispute. That can't be the basis of creating a trusting system. Whether you consider the assessee as a stakeholder, some nations go so far as to say that all my role as government is to collect and distribute tax. But honestly, if you didn't pay me tax, I could go nowhere. So thank you very much. We have lots of speeches thanking assessees, but our actions don't seem to support that. So it is critical. If we want GST and a national progression in terms of collecting more tax without litigation, without bad blood, that we have to make these changes.
Rohan, I'm sorry, before the thing, you are a lawyer. When there is an interpretation issue, benefit of doubt, if at all, it is to be given to whom? The assessee. It is what taught to you by Supreme Court in a number of judgments. You go to any training institute of the tax officers, whether it's center or in the state. When in doubt, you are in favor of revenue. If this is how the training takes place, then what do you expect as officer, young officer? They say maybe this is the way I must progress. So this actually creates such an amount of huge quantum of work legally. And today, in a GST system, if somebody has paid about 50 crores extra by mistake, by clerical mistake, to get it back and regularize it, the person has to go round and round and round. A clerical mistake. Now, and there are, if cause notice that can't be done, this can be done, etc., talking about law. All these things, when in fact, in one case, a person forgot to mention the name of the export license in the shipping document. The matter went for 9 years back and forth, remand and all this, whether the shipping bill can be amended or not. When I was talking to the client, he was actually from Singapore. He said, let me work. I don't know what's happening in your country. In our country, or if the problem was there, I had to ring up the custom officer. Hey, there is a mistake. He'll say, okay, correct it over phone. And here 9 years happened, the remand matter going on and on. So we have a system that has a judicial duty and judicial function. The judicial duty, judicial function must percolate right through. It is not merely to the quasi-judicial authority like our tribunals or something, even adjudication level. The training must take place there. And the best way is to segregate, put the China wall, put the administrators and judicial officers, give them the separate way of promotions and then career path rather than through the administrative system.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. So let me go to Mr. Najib Sir, who would like to respond to some of these suggestions.
A lot of food for thought, and I'm fortunate I'm not in government now. But the point being made by Mr. Lakshmikaran about the need for separation of the judicial from the executive is something which has been which is there in the files of CBIC now. And I think this is a discussion which at some point of time I have a lot of regard and respect for Mr. Lakshmikaran. I did have earlier too, and it was a suggestion which was made simply because, like was pointed out both by Rohan and by Mr. Lakshmikaran, there's a lot of burden being placed on the administrative officers to err in favor of revenue, and that independence which we expect from the judiciary does not always get reflected in the orders. So I think we did have these discussions whether we can have the separate cadre itself. It is not well taken. I think it needs to be ramrodded and forced through, because far too many of our officers would like to go back and forth between judicial functions and executive functions. So I think there's a need for a change in mindset, and I do not know if at all it will come through in the short term, but it is needed simply because the officers need to be assured that their decisions will not be will be viewed only judiciously and not from any angle. The issues which Mr. Sridhar had raised about the taxpayer being viewed as a stakeholder in the entire process is again well taken. We have, with due respect to all the panelists, tried to change our training pattern. We have tried to impress upon the officers to the extent of issuing even instructions from the board, money to say that, look, your adjudication orders will not be viewed from a vigilance angle. If you have to drop somebody, some case, do go ahead and do it, because the fear which was expressed at some point of time by officers was that, look, you start looking at it from a vigilance angle and suspecting that this order in favor of an assessee is because of considerations other than merit. So we have issued written instructions, and this is at my time, that this is something which is unfounded. Very few are the cases which have been referred to vigilance, and there were cases which deserve to be referred to the vigilance. It is not merely because it has been confirmed or dropped in favor of an assessee. Training we have tried to change. It's going to be a bit of a long drawn process, but I think the work is happening. I know that for a fact in academies across the country. We are trying to encourage the officers to have independent judicious thinking, to tell them that they are partners with the trade. Adversarial will not get us anywhere. Gone are those days of being adversarial with the trade and the taxpayer. That we are because of the taxpayer. These are things which are being taught to the younger lot of officers. The older lot, of course, will need to have a change in mindset, which I hope will happen as we go along. So quite frankly, I'm sanguine because Rohan, if you look at the number of appeals being filed by the department itself, they're dramatically coming down. We have been issuing instructions, keeping threshold limits so that at least frivolous cases don't go. All this has been done administratively, and the numbers are coming down. So hopefully, with time, as time goes by, we'll increase the threshold limits so that the appeals are not done merely because there's an order against the department. So that is something which we have consciously done it, and it is at every level, at the appellate level, at the tribunal level, at the High Court and the Supreme Court. There are written instructions to that extent. So I think things are changing. It'll take time because we're now talking of decades of mindset to change, but it will happen with the younger, brighter lot of officers coming in who feel that they're joining the revenue service is there to assist the taxpayer and not be his adversary. Thank you.
Thank you, Najib. I just wanted to have 2-3 comments on this. Thank you very much for saying that clarifications have been given, circulars have been given, that you act independently. Thank you very much. At least bringing it to the notice. But if you look at an officer when he is passing an order, when he gives a Supreme Court judgment, when he says, is there any board circular to support it? I feel insulted. When an officer during adjudication process, if he says, here is Supreme Court judgment on the very point, he said, yeah, I agree. But if there is a board circular, it is better for me. Now, this has something to do. Sir, I ask a question. Today, the legacy litigation in excise and service tax, you introduced, I mean, not you, the government introduced the Samadhan scheme. And it has been touted as one of the grand success. Have you analyzed why it happened, why the scheme has to come? That is because of the huge backlog of cases not being disposed of by the Tribunal, Commissioner of Appeal, High Courts, and Supreme Court. And 2, when you gave a concession, 40% and 50%, 60% concession, 40%, 50% concession, and no interest, no penalty, no prosecution, analyze the cases which have gone. Those people have been clandestine removals, goods cleared without payment of taxes, fake invoices, matters are pending in different variations, etc. Those cases will, any case be confirmed against them, they would have been facing the jail and counting the bars, and they all got out. And the honest taxpayers who have been paying the taxes, who believe that they have a good case, they're still waiting in the queue for last 9 years, 10 years in the tribunal. And the tribunal members are not there, tribunals are not functioning. And are we not creating a system whereby dishonest people can get discounts? Honest person must stand in the queue, wait for a decision from the tribunal or the High Court or Supreme Court. Is it what we have to create? I am not against anybody about the policy, etc. This system of having this I say again, we have said that any appeal filed by the revenue up to the Supreme Court, less than 2 crores, I withdraw, I don't issue. There are in fact important cases. It is taxpayers' money, your money and my money involved. In this Samadhan scheme, so much of money has been lost. I am also a honest taxpayer. Morning, evening, I work late night. I suppose I am better than a government lawyer, a government officer who is contributing to the exchequer. I am also contributing. I spend more than 12 hours a day, and then what earning is going to the government taxpayer. I think I am entitled to ask the government how dishonest taxpayer can be given discount. An honest payer like me must pay the interest and then wait for the queue. Now, this is a systemic error. Rohan, you just look at it. It is a systemic error. We have created a situation where large number of matters are pending at various stages, in adjudication stage, not adjudicated. And those cases which would have gone in favor of the revenue, you gave a discount. This is the reality of life today. And this could be averted if only we had enough number of benches in the tribunal and the appellate officer to do so. If we have got a legislation to say that show cause notice must be adjudicated within 1 year time, failing which it is abate, income tax has it. Today GST has it. We never had it earlier. We know cases show cause in 2003 are not adjudicated. They say call book, that book, etc., etc. See, I don't want to word dirty linen here, but suffice it to say that we created a system of large scale on orders which are passed, which are not sustainable. Large number of cases, sustainable orders, because matters are pending in the High Court and Supreme Court and the tribunal and appellate authorities. We came with a scheme with this 50% discount, 60% discount, along with penalty waiver, interest waiver, and prosecution waiver. People got benefit are those who are actually ought to have paid the full taxes here. This is what ultimately somewhere hurts you when you go to bed. What are we doing? Where are we living? I leave it here at this stage.
Thank you, sir.
No, let me just react. You see, you'll agree that every amnesty scheme, in effect, should not be there at all. We should not be having any amnesty schemes, but we have been consistently having amnesty schemes as a means of cleaning up your books in terms of at least reducing numbers of cases which are pending. And as you rightly pointed out, the beneficiaries have been the people who would not have got benefit otherwise. It's they who have availed of the scheme, and the people who feel they have a case would never come here simply because they know fully well that they can perhaps in a different fora get a beneficial order rather than go through the amnesty scheme itself. And but it is there, the amnesty scheme is there, and we have had it in the CBDT, we have had it in the CBIC, and I'm sure down the line after a couple of years again we'll have one more such amnesty scheme. It's something that periodically the government wakes up to and decides to have such an amnesty scheme. It should not happen. It is an insult to the honest taxpayer who has been paying his taxes regularly. The adjudication process itself has to change. I mean, there's no gainsaying denying it. Disputes and litigations are a burden not just for the taxpayer but for the department also. Monies are blocked. We believe that monies are due to us, and we show it as money is due to us when we know fully well perhaps that we're not going to get more than a certain smaller percentage of that money actually in our books, if at all, and whenever we do. So it is an issue. But you will appreciate the fact that if I speak also from a former enforcement man to say that, look, for every 10 honest taxpayers, we also have people who keep milking the system, who keep cheating the system. And that really is an issue which also needs to be addressed as to how do you make people believe that taxes are something which they have to pay. It's not something which they look at how they can avoid, how they can reduce, how they can cheat. And it works both ways, unfortunately. And the tax administrators tend to go overboard. Like you rightly pointed out in the law, you ended up having so many provisions to cut down possible evasion that you ended up making the law far more stringent than what it ought to have been. But it's a process which is going on. Hopefully things will change as we go forward, and the tax administrators with better training and better awareness of his role will also change. Thank you.
I have one more question. I'm Shailendra, you don't mind. I'm not asking you. I'm asking Rohan or others who are panelists here.
Please.
Probably I'm taking your role. You don't mind, Shailendra. So now let us take section 74 in the central GST. Simple. It says, if a supplier has paid less tax, the customer, when he pays the differential taxes, etc., he can take the credit, provided the non-payment of tax or less payment of tax was not due to fraud, pollution, blah, blah, blah. This is a legacy we have taken from excise and also service tax. I am asking a question, whether the person committed a sin or the goods committed a sin. We are taking with the goods tax and service tax. We are not talking about the personality of the person who committed error. If a person smuggled goods, can he say that because I have smuggled, therefore no tax payable? Whether or not he has smuggled, you will get the rate after tax and exemption properly applied. I would first of all say, if this section 74 as it is today and the earlier sections, which says that if any differential tax is being paid due to fraud, collusion, etc., the customer cannot take the credit. It means for the person, and it is routinely issued show cause notices, the less charge is because of fraud. To get it set aside, it takes 10 years or more from the tribunal or the High Court or Supreme Court. During this time, the person who has paid the tax, differential tax, he cannot persuade this buyer to pay the differential amount to him because he cannot take the credit. And he has to take as a burden for himself. And if there is going to be 18%, 28% tax on this, it becomes 36% more plus interest on penalty. It is the surest way that the industry can be killed. Later on, he may be vindicated by the tribunal, but by the time he is killed, like what Bernard Shaw said when he was given a Nobel Prize, he said it is like giving a lifeboat to a person who has reached the other shore. Here I must modify slightly. It is like giving a lifeboat that already drowned and died. What is the point giving a lifeboat? This is systemic error. The systemic error is this. Today, we don't have a system whereby we can differentiate between a sinner and the goods which never sinned. You are now putting a penalty on the goods because the goods were supplied by a sinner, an alleged sinner. I don't know whether any country will have a tax system after this. These are the aberrations. And as Rohan put it, these are small things. If they are corrected, etc. And I think if we can say ITC is one area where we will streamline the system in the GST, etc., 90% problems are solved. People are prepared to live with the 5%, 12%, 18%, 28%, 200%. I am prepared to live. However, give me a stability. Give me a system whereby I am not being troubled. I am paying the tax. My system, our credit system must flow properly. My exports should go up. My cost should come down. I should not be exporting taxes when I'm exporting goods or services. You give me that. I don't want anything else. But this country will improve. It'll bounce back. It can do wonders. Only small thing we need to do, just streamline your ITC.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. A lot of burdens, the ITC, liberalizing ITC.
Shailendra, you can ask Mr. Najib Shah for his comments on the compensation cess that was raised. I think he missed.
Okay.
What am I to say about the compensation cess? You see the 14% itself, which we accepted, and it was literally at the point of the gun, which we accepted as the rate of growth, which the center accepted, was a huge burden. And with that burden, and with it being a destination-based tax, yes, the manufacturing states were bound to be concerned about their revenue. Now, there's a clear understanding that we should not take out this revenue from the CGST, SGST component. Hence, we went back to introducing a cess, which is never a great idea, having eliminated all cesses in the GST. But again, it was believed that it will be a short-term arrangement and an arrangement which will get the approval of the states, definitely, simply because this money was being raised only for them. So we had the cess, and going forward, if there is bound to be a problem in the cess amount being collected not being sufficient to compensate, the center has a serious problem in its hands, because it will really have to start looking at other sources of revenue. So what are the possibilities? Do you bring in more goods into the cess pool? Do you increase the cess amount, which is already steep? Do you borrow? There are multiple challenges there. And I think it's an unenviable position for the central government to find itself in, given the state of the economy and the need perhaps of continuing to give the cess for some more time to come.
Right. So lots of issues are, in fact, yes. So in fact, sir, now we are also inching towards our deadline, and I would like to request each panelist, to give us a concluding 1 or 2 suggestions for the GST Council, how to deal with this, the COVID, which has not only upended our life, it has completely battered the economy. So maybe let me start with Mr. Rohan Saha. Maybe, sir, a couple of suggestions for the council. What exactly the council should do?
Yeah. At the cost of some repetition, I would really focus, as I think everybody has said, on the issue that I first raised, which is ensuring a completely robust ITC. Every rupee of tax must become credit, and especially those sectors which are the ones which create the most employment today, which are facing these issues, which is construction, real estate, restaurants, but it's wider than that. So one situation would be that. The second is not a suggestion on what to do, but it is a suggestion on what not to do. And the two things which government must be extremely careful on: one, I don't think this is the time or the sentiment exists in people to bear more taxes. So, any form of more tax, whether compensation or any other form where you drag in more products, I don't think it's a time for it. The second situation is, given the revenue shortfall and given the state of industry, we must not lapse into what is our normal default mode when something like this happens, which is that we then become more litigious because we raise more and more fanciful demands against assessees, somehow to show that, there is hope of some revenue. I don't think this is a time for fanciful interpretation or fanciful litigation. The third situation is all your inverted duty structure issues, all your refund issues. We must responsibly step up to say that, if this is due to industry, it must be paid to industry in a timely and respectful manner. So if these are issues that we can address, as also setting the institutional problems right, the AARs, we need lesser litigation. It's the need of the hour. In a crisis, no nation can afford to spend disproportionate amounts on litigation. And whether we like it or not, our ambition is to be a developed nation. But today, we are a nation who is still in a phase of developing. We cannot waste resource. And I just, leave one final sort of comment, and it's old farming wisdom. And in old farming wisdom, you're taught how to use your resources well. So when an old farmer is teaching his grandson, his grandson is using a lovely thoroughbred horse who's 6 feet tall. He's putting bags of hay on the horse's back and, making him walk back and forth. And, the grandfather says that, he says, grandson, if God gives you a thoroughbred stallion, please don't treat it as a donkey. I think that is how also we should treat our GST. Let us learn to respect it and let us learn to get the most out of it, rather than treating it as a beast of burden like we are doing right now.
Thank you, sir. Let me go to Mr. Lachu to answer.
I think I have said enough. Short-term measures structural changes in the way of dispensing justice, not dispensing with justice. If that is done, and it is not, it's not rocket science. It can be done in a matter of a year or so. I think we can segregate all those things, etc. You can ask for choices, preferences. There are many people who will opt for it, but there must be a will. If the officers push back, I think political wisdom has to come in and say it has to be done, because ultimately it is the benefit to the economy as a whole. I think I don't want to repeat what I have said, etc. But streamline ITC, make it simpler. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Let me go to Mr. Najib sir. Yes, sir.
No, I think I echo what has been told by both Mr. Rohan Shah and Mr. Lakshmikaran. I also think that we should not tinker around with policy too much. Too many knee-jerk reactions have been taking place, which doesn't help either the tax administration or the taxpayer. I think stability is required. And I really am quite obsessed, frankly, with technology, because I think it is a key element in the entire tax structure. I think we need to focus a lot on technology and ensure that it works, it is efficient, it delivers what the law contemplates, so that it makes the taxpayer experience so much better. And tax administrators, the points have been well taken by what has been told by the panelists about the need for them to be judicious, about the need for the administration to reassure the officers that there are partners with the taxpayers, and that they're there because of the taxpayer and not the other way around. That's something which the training process is changing and improving. But yes, there's obviously work to be done. Thank you.
So it's turn of our interveners to add a few points.
Yeah, I think they have said everything. They've said everything. They've talked about ITC. They've talked about better administration, dispensation of justice. And I would rather say the unfolding of the measures without simply changing the fiscal policy in two buckets, which are immediately required by 2021, and certain things that can be really examined and done later on. I think that would be the need of the hour, so that we don't lose the urgency. And last but not the least, for those sectors which are really deprived of trade and business because of the pandemic, some relief is overdue, and the relief due on pandemic, that really needs to be attended and referred to a committee of law officers or to the law committee immediately.
Shailendra, if I just intervene, Mr. Rastogi, I can see Mr. Rastogi. I do not know whether he wishes to ask or participate in any which way. I don't think you should let him go without his participation.
Oh,
I request.
Sir, welcome, sir. It's wonderful to have you.
He's on mute.
So please unmute and speak, sir.
No, just now Shikhar had told him that it's open. He can talk if he wants to. Maybe he didn't get the message.
Sir, can you hear me, sir?
I think it's not around the computer anymore, I believe.
Yeah, he's frozen and he's on mute. Yeah.
But actually, he has asked a question.
He has.
There is the chat. He has asked a question whether the statute should remain static always.
Okay. So this is for Lakshmikaran sir.
Legislation in any country will have to necessarily take into account the need of the particular country at a particular point of time. I am not saying the law should be static. But we have also seen Indian Penal Code, we also see the Indian Contract Act, and many legislations have stood the test of time with not many amendments. I can understand that the legislation has been introduced, requires certain amendments. I would like to have the law as dynamic, not static, but should not become dynamite. That's the only problem.
Correct.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, I think Mr. Rastogi is here.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes, sir. Welcome, sir.
I'm sorry I missed you.
Sir, welcome.
I have gone through the entire discussion, and it was a pleasure for me to hear the distinguished panelists. And I think it could not have been better than this panel, which is there. It started with, I think, the review of the GST from 2017 onward. Then it percolated to several other areas, including the best kind of tax administration we can have, or the best kind of system to dispense justice we can have, and many other areas. So it did not remain confined to GST alone, but some other issues also. My feeling is that Indians are very intelligent, and it is a country of argumentative Indians. So there will be never a situation where there will be complete unanimity of views in whatever decision we take. And therefore, debates will always continue. And it should continue because it is the way of refining a system. It is a way of modernizing a system. And we have to move with times. When I was in service, we started with the concept that board circulars are meant for departmental officers only, and they are not meant for public. And it used to be written on the circular also that it is not for other than the departmental officers. Suddenly one day, RK Jain took the courage of publishing that way back in 1977 or 1978. And the board could not do anything because he started publishing and he went on publishing, in spite of the fact that the circular said that it is for departmental officers only. Then I saw those days when the books were not easily available or the notifications were not easily available to the public. It will reach the public after 5 days, 6 days, 7 days, or 8 days. Then a time came when it became a situation when it was floating in the air. You can plug in from anywhere in the world and you can read the circular, you can read the notification. The point making is that tax policies also, they keep on changing along with time. And there can never be a situation, whereas Lakshmi Kumaran rightly pointed out, that it should be a victim of being static for all times to come. It cannot happen. And therefore, changes have to take place. The only point is that certain fundamentals of tax policy, which are largely agreed by everyone, by the policymakers, by the tax or the policies which are a deviation from those fundamentals, they should be avoided. Najib Shah has correctly pointed out, and Lakshmi Kumar and Najib Shah and I have the experience of working in government, that government decisions are not taken on ideal perceptions always. There are certain situations where deviations have to be made for other considerations. Revenue consideration is one of them. And therefore, suddenly some idea will come that in order to increase the revenue, why not impose a cess? Why not impose a motor spirit cess? Why not impose a diesel cess? Something like that will come. And even the best of the economists in the finance ministry who have international experience and who claim to have worked in international institutions for a number of decades, they will also support those ideas. Therefore, these deviations or these aberrations, they do come in the tax policy as the result of many other factors. And as I said, the tax policy is one test is whether it is giving you adequate amount of revenue or not. I mean, that is one yardstick from the government's point of view. The government has to consider whether the tax policy which I have framed or the tax system which I am administering in the country, is it giving me adequate revenue or not? If it is not giving adequate revenue, then some changes become inevitable. And those changes may be away from the fundamentals sometimes, which the economists may argue you should never break. And therefore, these things do happen. But many points which are made by the distinguished panelists in this, they make good sense that they should not be broken. I mean, they should not be deviated. So to that extent, I think It was a very wonderful discussion. And I particularly thank you, Shailendra, that you must continue with this kind of debates, because this kind of debate, they bring out from those people who have been in the field for in various spectrum, some tax administrators, some policymakers, and some of those in the industry and some in the law. For example, a lawyer, with great respect to Mr. Lakshmi Kumar, will never like the tax to be so simple that there should be no litigation. Never ever any lawyer will say that there should be no litigation. So therefore litigation will come, and part of the litigation in this country, I know of situations where I have seen a president of the tribunal telling in the open court, when he said that this is my view, then one advocate said, my lord, there is a Supreme Court judgment. So that judgment says something different. And the honorable president tells, maybe out of ego or maybe out of his confidence, you bring any judgment and I will distinguish that judgment. And still I will give the judgment according to my judgment. So the point I'm making is that in law interpretation, sometimes it happens that views prevail, interpretation prevail. Even the Supreme Court, what they consider tomorrow as a good law, they may change that interpretation after 10 years, after 15 years. One day Supreme Court says that if there is a difference of views and if two views are possible, the benefit should go to the assessee. After several years, the Supreme Court says that not in all situations, in some situations, the benefit will go to the department also, to the government also. So these disputes, interpretation, they will always happen. But I think the law should settle fundamentally. GST is a new law. 3 years is too small a period to review it. Excise could not settle for dozens of years. Customs could not settle for decades. And therefore, GST also will take its own time. But fundamentally, it is a good tax because so many countries are adopting it. So many countries are gaining benefit out of it. Therefore, fundamentally, everybody agrees it's a good tax. So it will come. But this kind of suggestions which are coming out of this discussion, they certainly throw light on the weaknesses, on the strength of the GST system. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Rastigi Saab. Thank you very much. I could see you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sir, actually, sir, Mr. Najib Shah was saying we shouldn't leave without hearing Mr. Rastogi.
No, no, Najib Shah is actually at the fulcrum because he was the person who was in charge of the board at the time GST was actually brought on the statute book. So it is very good of you that you thought of him and he could come for this panel discussion.
Thank you.
Sir. Thank you.
Namaskar. Namaskar.
So thank you, sir. I mean, it was wonderful to have Mr. T.R. Rastogi, and as he rightly said that it was good to have it. You know, the GST is a good tax system, but it is not a simple tax system. And in fact, there are many takeaways in fact from the distinguished panelists. Lots of important points have been made, and I'm sure that those points will be very relevant for the North Block, for the policymakers, and also for the SSCs and professionals. And I'm very confident that all the attendees must be very happy that they were enlightened, and it was very enriching and stimulating debate and discussions. And let me thank Mr. Lakshmi Kumar for giving us a lot of insight, Mr. Rohan Saab for very valuable comments, and thank you, sir. And we look forward to having all of you again, and for this sort of interesting debates. And till the time the law settles, and the law will never settle, and all of us will keep meeting. So
thank you very much for enabling me to meet Lakshmi Kumaran after a very long time. And
Thank
Najib
you,
Shah
sir.
also after election.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Najib. Thank you very much, Najib.
Thank you, sir. It was wonderful to have you. And of course, you were in the driving seat that time, and of course, lots of interesting insights and limitations. Of course, I mean, you rightly highlighted those limitations, and of course, the desirable path ahead for all of us, for the country as a whole, and we should be striving and craving for that. And I'm sure the GST Council will certainly take a few points from us for our debate. And to both the interveners, of course, Mr. Vijay Kumar and Mr. Siddha, thank you for making it very, very interesting. So we will meet again. So thank you so very valuable.
Thank you so much. very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.